In this example, we're going to try to do something a little bit more limber, something a little bit slick, give ourselves the opportunity to practice some body mechanics that really have a very smooth flowing motion, along with the opportunity to work on some overlap, anticipation and so on, and to do it with a quadruped. So here we have this sort of generalish quadruped. In this example, he's going to be a bit like a kitty cat, and we're going to bounce him between these two platforms here. It helps to take a peek at a bit of reference for something like this, of course. It's quite a fast movement, so seeing something that's either in sequence or slow motion will help you out a lot in figuring out what needs to happen when. We can see from the sequence of images the rough moves that are going on here. The push off, the reach, the catch, the follow in of the rear end there, and of course you can see at the end the front is pushing itself forward as the rear end comes in. Of course we're going after a cat creature, but you will find that in leaping motions like this for quadruped animals, the same is true in an awful lot of different creatures. We see here this little mousy fella, who of course is following a very similar pattern there. But other than just the pattern of the motion itself, the specific keys if you like, we can also notice some very specific characterful keys. In the case of the mouse here, that's going to be this part of the move here, where he's got his little paws tucked up in that mousy little fashion. Of course we're going for a cat-like movement on this fellow, and you might argue that the model is sort of a funny generic quadruped as opposed to a specific cat, but hopefully by the time we're finished with it, it will really start to scream cat, not from the design of the body, but from the design of the motion. It's how we inject the character. If we look at another little sequence example here of a cat jumping, then there are again certain points. I'm thinking specifically of this one here, which is signature cat pose. So here we are in our starting position. He's scouting, looking ahead at the platform in front of him. We are in stepped keys mode here, so we're going to start this out stepped and then work into it from there. So let's start knocking in some poses. So first thing, we're going to do a little bit of anticipation. So he's going to press himself down, ready for the lift off. So we'll bring his chest down, possibly not that much, it's a little over exaggerated, but we can obviously see about that later on. Obviously needs to bring his butt up to compensate a little bit. Neck, start to pitch down, of course, that comes into the whole anticipation of it all. We don't have a great amount in the way of shoulders on this model, but we can still lift up his clavicle, his shoulder there some. It'll help give it a little bit of extra signature as we go on. The tail we can perhaps come back and look at afterwards. Okay, so let's go right into the thrust of the jump here. Something like that. He is of course propelling himself upwards. His spine is starting to push out, of course, and we take the front feet here, can bring those up. Let's adjust the press there, and let's also bring the head there. He's pushing himself like that, nice clean line. The front feet, having just left the edge there, would also of course be tilted down like this, or perhaps what is going to be easier will be to grab the foot controllers there and just tip the toe itself directly like that, perhaps pushing the feet just a little further out in front like this. There we go. One of the things I'm going to do here, and since we're on stepped keys it's possibly slightly easier, so I'm just going to come ahead a few frames here and I'm going to go straight into the landing pose. So we can land his front feet onto the other platform. He will of course be pitched down somewhat like that, so we'll turn him down and we'll bring him right over here. Of course we want to reset those toes there and also change the angle on his wrist. You'll notice that when cats impact to land, they have their heads picked up. They don't come down like that because they'll bash their jaws on the ground, so the head is pitching back up at this point. whilst the rear legs will be up nice and high like this, coming in ready to make their landing. The back and his rear end will be arched ever so slightly, maybe pulled up a little bit higher there, maybe not a huge amount. The legs in a position where the knees are quite high up, have a bit of press there down into the legs, so he's really got them tucked up. And there we go, we see the beginnings of our motion here already. Already we sort of get a feeling for it if we just scrub our timeline like this. Come back there, sproing, sproing, sproing. So there, with just, what's that, really just 4 keys, start, our anticipation, lift off and land, we're already getting a sense of the motion here. We'll just give it a little real-time playback here so we can see how it's looking time-wise. Of course, it's a little bit slow at the minute perhaps, but we'll get some of the in-between stuff done first and then see how that looks. Easiest one to work on then is the main in-between, which is going to be the point at which he's highest in his leap, the top of the arch, if you will. That will see him somewhere like this, have his root almost level, have his butt coming up, a little bit of a curve there, head slightly down, perhaps a little less curve on the back, coming closer to straight. So we've got this straighter line through the spine there. Rear legs at this point will be somewhere up here. And what we'll see generally is that this part here, which would be the foot in us of course, that is going to be keeping pretty much straight like this, 90 degrees to the ground. Somewhere I think around like that. And then of course the toes will be pitched down at this point, so the whole leg is like that. This is after the leg has already pushed off and it's starting to recoil. The front legs will be hunched right up like this, as if he's waiting to catch something, which of course he really is. Once again, the toes are going to be pointing forwards again by this point. We're seeing a lift on the hand portion there. Perhaps that can come in just a little lower. Important part being to keep the elbow reasonably well tucked. He is coming forward with that because of course he is readying himself to catch something, so I'll just give him a little pitch down on the toe actually as well, not completely flat. Oh, I put that frame in slightly the wrong place. Just grab all his controls. There we go, that's where we want it. Lovely. Okay, straight away then, looking at this, I think I should have him be springing up higher. So I've just come in too low with this, so let's just move the whole thing up. Grab all of him up like that. There we go. And he might also need to come ever so slightly forward of this position. So let's see, how does that look? There we go. What I probably think at this point is that it's actually not that huge a leap he's taking here. So for the sake of example, I'm going to space this out more, give him some real distance to cover, which in fairness isn't all that unrealistic. Have him leap several times his own body length is quite acceptable. There we go, we've moved our landing out, and we'll just grab and move out our top level like this. Again, make that more or less central between the two platforms there, and we can get him back into that position there. Perhaps just a little bit further forward, I think. Probably somewhere more like this. There we go. Let's see how that appears. Ah, that's a nice long jump now. It's starting to look a bit more like we would want it to. And also the timing is better, considering he's now travelling a greater distance. The amount of time that he's taking to cover that distance is probably more realistic with the timing that we've got set up here on the keyframes. Let's get to laying in some of these other in-betweens then in the points of the jump. Now, what we have of course got here is we've got a 10 frame jump, and of course the midpoint is at 5 frames, and we're going to want to do the 2 midpoints either side of that, but we can't really go to 2.5 frames. Well, we could if we turned on fractional frames, or of course we could perhaps be using some different frame rate. And that can of course make things easier, because then you're able to get, you know, exact divisions in the distance that is travelled. But of course, to do this right, when you don't have an exact halfway point in between, you just have to get your frame or your positioning rather, of the character at the percentage point along the distance, if you like, that is necessary to marry up with that point in time. So if we put the frame here, this case at 17, then he'll come to just under halfway the distance between here and here. And of course, if you'd have put it at 18, then he would be a little over half of the distance between. In the instance of this animation, however, it's also, of course, worth noting that there's a lot of change in his body shape. You know, the action shifts very rapidly at the beginning of the jump, where he's lifting off, and also towards the end as he's coming in to land. The midway action that's taking place whilst he is flying through the air is a bit softer and a bit looser. As such, placing our key just before the halfway point and just after the halfway point will actually help us to get the detail into the motion at the points in time where we really need to see it. So let's start out here then, frame 17. I'm just going to turn on my motion paths to help me judge this a little better. So let's move him out. We can see the keys there. Halfway between would be about here somewhere, so we want to be just slightly ahead of that, somewhere approximately here. And you can see, of course, that's going to be the point where he's fully sprung right off the platform here. So his legs are pulled right out, full extension there. The spine also is fully pulled. We've got a little bit of upturn on the trajectory of his root there. And there we see the spring like that. Whilst the front legs here are going to be right tucked up underneath him. I'm going to start the unfurling of his toe there like this. We'll just adjust the press on the foot there. Maybe not quite so much. Have it just a little bit up like that. And also try and tuck this right up there nice and tight. Okay, so there we have this motion. Notice, of course, the path of the front paws here. You've got this under arc, of course. You might be tempted to think that it should arc over, and you should indeed consider it, but of course, remember, the arms are being pulled up under the body as it travels. They don't necessarily go in this overarch motion throughout the whole thing. Let's then come to 2 frames before the landing. Again, our halfway point would be about here, so we want to be somewhat ahead of that. So here-ish, give or take. We'll grab his rear feet, which at this point are really starting to come in, ready to catch, perhaps something like this. And just pull the toe up a little bit as well here. Whilst the front paws are well extended out, really getting ready to catch the ledge that's coming up. The neck at this point will be starting to rise a little, preparing itself for its higher position there. And of course we should also check its position here, where what we want to do is lift it up slightly, again putting that rod right down the back here as he's really pressing, not just with his legs but of course with his whole spine. So we have a little click through and we can see we scrub, we've got our spring and travel like that. Give it a little playback, see how it looks. Now we're starting to see some pretty decent motion going on there, and we're really getting the feeling of the lift off into the catch some. Okay, now it can be a little hard to see at this point, but of course the thing we also have to deal with is the rate of acceleration. Of course, as he's pushing himself away, once his feet leave the platform, he starts to decelerate because he's losing momentum. And so even though this should be ever so slightly less than halfway between, I am going to bring his position on this frame here somewhat forward of where we have it in order to give him that little extra punch of acceleration coming from the rear limbs as he is of course leaving the platform. So perhaps something like that gives him a little more speed out of his jump. Now we see reasonably a minor difference. We've only moved him a small amount, but it does give that sense of a greater lift-off speed. The thrust looks much better than it did a second ago. Okay, let's start to deal with what happens after the landing, and I just want to make a couple of little adjustments to the landing frame here. First off, I'm going to pull him just a little bit further forwards, so as he's just a little bit further over the platform. Of course, make the necessary adjustments here on the hands and feet as they are. Just a tiny little bit of shifting there. What we also want to notice, of course, you can go back and look at the reference for this, is that the hands don't land together. One comes slightly out in front of the other one like this. So that'll be our landing pattern there for the hands. Also, by this point, the feet have started to differentiate slightly from one another. During the push-off and the lift, they were completely twinned to one another. They were doing the exact same action. But by this point in time, they've started to shift a little bit and prepare for the step that will come. And so, of course, the rear foot that goes forward the furthest is on the same side as the arm, which is backwards the furthest. So we can see that, of course, is the far side from our view, something like this. Let's see how it's looking from here. Looking pretty nice. Liking the look of that. Got a real good sense of the spring there. You can really see the back legs pop out. Okay, good. So let's come to the landing frame then. Of course, once he's caught, he's going to be catching his weight. He's going to decelerate quite notably. So we'll do this as a 1, 2, 3 frames and see how that looks for starters. And we're going to take his root here, start to level it off just a bit, not too much. Of course, we bring him down because he's catching the weight, and we push him over so as his root is basically over this landing foot. Somewhere perhaps like this seems pretty good. Also, I'm going to take the rear side landing foot. I'm actually going to just move it back a little scotch at the landing point there, and we're going to roll this so this has started to lift off. He's sort of getting ready to roll that front foot forward to take his next step forward. Meanwhile, the rear foot on that side has properly landed and stepped past this foot, this front foot I should say. So let's have a close-up look at that and get the positioning there. Obviously we don't want to be penetrating, so we'll just dodge you. There we are, something like that. Roll. There we are. So he's starting to step through. He takes his first landing step. Whilst this foot is, of course, landed also, very much twinned with the other rear foot, of course, but just slightly behind it. So he's there and in. There and in. Can begin to see how that plays with the whole thing. There we go. Look at that. Great sense of catch that we've got going on there. Also, at this point, because, you know, his weight is coming down and he's getting both this and his own weight is sort of catching up with him, so to speak, we have the neck flop down a little bit as it overshoots just a scotch. And then let's move on to his next step, of course, as he steps out of the landing. Still decelerating here, so we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 frames. And what we're going to do is take this trailing front foot here, and he's going to have started to bring this forwards, ready to plant it down on the floor again. That toe will have begun to roll out just a little bit there, so just starting to lift like that. So let's bring it actually a little further forward still. Of course, his body coming forward a fair bit, let's say around here-ish seems good. We might bring that a little more. Whilst this rear foot here will just be starting ready to lift off. So there we see, like that, and into the forward motion. We'll now come out further into the next step. I'm just going to try lengthening it some more, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That might be pushing it, but I guess we'll see. The toe on this leading front foot will have come completely flat by this point, and the foot will be planted. It will probably have been planted, of course, a couple of frames sooner, but we'll do that when we get into the tweening. Whilst this trailing rear foot is going to be getting ready to lift off. This rear leg that was lifting before, we can just bring it now to a point where it has come forward of that foot like this. So something like that, I think. Perhaps this leading foot, if I just look at the positioning of it, that should perhaps come a little bit further forward than I have it. Maybe planted that here. And of course his body now starting to right and move forward as well as up. Also take the spine, and that'll be beginning to straighten now. The head or the neck coming back up some there. So let's just see how that landing there plays in. There we go. It is perhaps a little slow, so maybe doesn't need to be decelerating quite as fast. So I can just drag those frames back. Let's just say one frame, we'll do it on the 4 again. Push that frame for all his controls back there. Like, yeah, that's a bit better. You see, with the deceleration, with the slowing down there, you do start to get the sense of him catching himself. Now we'll move forward 5 frames and we'll start to bring him to a rest position. So we won't just have him walking off, we'll just have him coming to a nice simple rest. So we'll bring this foot here, this front leg there, just ahead of the other. We'll bring his body up and forwards, somewhere like this. Take that front leg a little further forward still, somewhere here-ish, perhaps. Seems like a good pose. And this rear leg here can now finally have moved somewhere forwards like this. We'll come another 5 frames forward, bring him up and forwards a little, start to roll him back. We'll go 3 frames, put in a hold here, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll start to bring him down into that seated position again. So we'll pitch up his spine like this and bring his rear end down. This trailing rear leg here will have moved forward somewhere to around here, and we can have the neck pitch itself right up there. Sitting him down, we'll also push him forward. Looks a bit wrong, him just going straight down from his chest. He wants to shift forward a slight amount. So there, the stop and back to rest. Okay, let's pull back and see how this whole thing looks. That ending there with him coming to rest, of course, at this moment might need retiming, might be a bit rough, but we'll see how it plays out. That doesn't look so bad, timing wise, seems broadly okay, and certainly I think our motion is looking overall pretty nice. We're definitely getting that sense of the leap. Of course, notice he's not coming up that high when he leaps. We're not doing some great big exaggerated jump here. Perhaps if this were a cartoon character, we would be doing something like that. But of course, if you have cats or have had, or you've seen people's cats jumping, then one of the things that you will have noticed or might have noticed, and certainly if you go back, find some videos of cats jumping and whatnot, when they are crossing a divide like this, they don't jump up, they don't aim for height, because of course the more height you try and put into your jump, the less forward momentum you have. You waste your energy on going up and subsequently aren't able to travel forward. You need to get forward spring to clear you across, and just enough height to be able to give you clearance to reach the other side. And so what we are seeing here is that whilst it's quite a powerful forward jump, it isn't a particularly high jump, and that does start to give quite a natural appearance to the motion that we're getting here. So the thing to do here then is to start changing all of our keys, because really we've gone pretty much as far as we can with stepped keys. So we're going to switch everything to linear mode. I'm going to use the tool in the animation toolbox for that. Select linear here for all channels, of course, and set curve. I'll do that on the root, and I will do, of course, exactly the same for all of the null controllers there. So straight away, let's take a look at how this looks now that it's been linearized. Okay, we've got some sliding, of course, because we didn't hold everything in place, but we're getting a cleaner sense of the motion now. We can see places where it needs a little bit of, work, some overshoot, especially we can see the spine there could use some work to give it a better sense of weight, particularly in the landing here. That's fine. But we see that the rate of movement across the jump is pretty good. The speed at which he lifts off once he starts to push really does work well. and overall the smoothness is pretty decent. So let's get into putting in some of those holds. We'll bring up the toolbox again for this. Keep it down here because then he should jump right over it, which will be nice and handy. And let's start. Okay, so first thing, of course, we see that these front paws here, during the lift off, they're running ahead. We didn't have a hold key for them, so that's no problem. Just find their keyframe there, copy their pose, where they're going to need to hold until. He's down, push, possibly somewhere around here, I think. So I'm going to paste that pose there. There we go. Do, of course, take note, if you look at reference, you'll find that when, these animals jump in this fashion, they don't push with their arms very much at all. The push, the spring, it all comes from the rear legs. So as you can see, he's really not pushing with those forearms. They're not pressing back as he lifts off. Let's have a look at what else we've got. Well, we've got that left side front paw there, which lands and then just slides forward to this point. It won't lift off before that one touches down. So let's copy that point there, and then just after that one touches down, we'll paste it back in place there. There we go. You can see that that looks quite nice. Look, you get that real peel as his leg there comes forward, his foreleg comes forward. Okay, let's go and check the rear legs now. I'm going to zoom in so as we can actually see what we're doing a bit more clearly here. All right, let's grab that one, see where does it need to be held. All right, it's just doing a slide there. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-ish, I guess, perhaps something like that. Again, it will be actually probably there once this trailing rear leg touches down. So that's where I'm going to hold it till. That's where I'm going to hold it from. So I can copy that and paste it there. Good. Okay. Now I've got to take care of this one, which is also sliding. It's not sliding there. That, of course, is held, and there's his step. So that's the pose that we want to copy. And till what point? When will he bring that forwards? Let's just say from here, shall we? 6 frames before that. Okay, that's obviously wrong, because that, of course, is him coming in to sit. So he needs to bring it forward just before then. So he really needs to be touching it down, probably somewhere around here. So let's grab both of those and just rattle them back. Time here. That's now just a little tight. So let's rattle that forwards by, let's say, 1 frame. So that's now a 5-frame move. Of course, he's not going to start moving until that other foot touches down. So let's say actually it's going to be from here. Now that's too quick, so let's just move it out to there, see how that looks. That's not so bad. We can perhaps tidy that up later. Actually, I think the timing is probably fine. It's just that it's not lifting off, it's dragging along the ground that makes it look a little weird at that stage. Let's just have a close look at that in motion. Ah yes, that's looking pretty decent, or decent enough for this stage in the game. With these basic holds done, then we can start to work on some of the in-betweening, and we may as well just go back and start in the earlier part of our animation. And also, because we're going to be setting keys, if you've done as I've done here, go and change your default key type back to linear now, since we're in the linear phase of this whole animation process. Right, where shall we start then? Well, I'm going to come over here and look at our initial anticipation before liftoff, as that's currently just, sliding here and traveling like that. It's probably a little slow coming down, so I'm going to take those frames and I'm going to shift them back to about frame 7, so cut 3 frames off it there. Then I'm going to hold it, so I'm going to just add in another hold here. Of course, once he starts to spring, we want him to go pretty quick, so I'm going to say that that's just going to be a 3-frame action, so I'll hold it up until 12 there. So that gives us a little 5-frame hold. And I just need to do the same on these little wrist, foot, IK and shoulder controllers there. Just give those a little nudge, and also copy, paste their pose to create the hold There, super. So that's pretty good, and we get a nice swift spring up when he starts to jump. Good, okay, we like that. So let's look at his route, because we have got quite tight timing here. Look at the path of travel for it. Okay, that's, pretty good, I think. Here then, at 16, these legs aren't extending enough. So what we want to do is have a single frame in between there. These really are coming off their lift point like that, so we get this full extension. And also I'm going to pop another frame here just to keep them extended out, and I'm also going to roll out the toes some like this, of course making sure to go and adjust them at these points. There we go. As we can see, therefore, on these rear legs, we've got very tight one key per frame, but because we've got such a fast changing action here, we really do need that kind of detail in our tweening. Right, I'm going to look at the butt control, as it were, and see how this guy will need to move itself. Here, I'm going to bring it down slightly like this immediately after the push forward, so that gives him a slight dunk. I'm also going to bring it down a little here, so this is pushing, more on his legs. This is putting in some spring on those legs. I'm going to arch the spine back like that as well to really sort of accentuate that. And in fact, at this point 17, I'll just over push the spine, which is a slight exaggeration, but it carries this sense of press. As you see there, you've not just got the legs acting, you've got the whole torso of the animal is being used to propel itself like that. 20, I'm going to make it a little straighter, and then coming across here, I'm going to pop an in between at perhaps, I think, 23 here, 2 before that point. I'm going to turn the spine like this. I'm also going to bring it up into the air in this manner. So let's see, that should give him this sense of having his shape actually roll over. And to help that, I'm going to bring the main root down in that keyframe there, whilst also starting to pull the spine out and not have it quite so flexed there, so there's a bit of trailing action going on there. Let's just take a peek at how our fella's looking like this. Aha, there we go. Let's give it a scrub and see it in detail. And I think really that high point, I'm going to push further down, so we'll make that there at the 22. Now his arc is starting to look a little weird, principally I think because of this, so what we need to do is pitch him slightly forward there. We can bring him back up again, but we'll also need to bring the tail end up as well. Oops, sorry, not on that frame, we wanted it here, didn't we? So yeah, we'll let his tail end really rise there. What we see here, frame 25, let's keep it up again like this. That makes it a little better. Let's again look at it at full speed. So there we go. Yeah, that's probably getting a better appearance now. What I'll probably do here then is create another in between, so we have him, just come into contact there, and 1, 2, 3 frames later, possibly only 2 frames later in fact, I am going to key his spine just like this, and then back at that point I am going to extend it back out, so he's got his body really being pulled and extended by this whole thing. There we go, that gives it more snap, so the spine really only takes the bend and the crunch there as he hits and starts to decelerate. Again, I might just curl it under, something like that there, give it a nice sort of arch, and I'll do the same back here as well. Don't want him double bending himself around. And there we go, seeing it full speed, that's a lot more slick looking now. We've really got that slickness and follow through in the spine, as well as the sense of overshoot when he lands and the butt catches up with him. Let's focus on the actual lift off, of course. He does the anticipation with the little hold. That's good. That's pretty well timed, I think. You know, he goes down, holds it, and then whoosh, leaps. It's starting to look pretty good. And also, of course, the action on the rear legs as he takes off there. It's got a really good sense of spring in them now. Look at that. It's very nice, I do believe. Since we've adjusted the butt quite high here, then I'm going to come back to my rear legs and find their keyframe there and bring them up so they're tucking up under him like that. As they, you know, come out of their extension, he starts to bring them forward, get them tucked in and prepare them for the landing there. Good. In this little frame here, before he touches down, because that's very swift, little 2-frame point there, I'm going to make an adjustment on the front paws so as that one really is reaching forwards here for the touchdown. And I'm also just going to angle it like this so that we really do get the feeling of him preparing to catch himself as he comes in. Put a little hold on the IK foot control there just so as I can lift his arm a touch there. There we go. Smashing. Again, let's just play this back full speed so as we can see going on. How's it looking? Looking pretty good. Of course, we've got the whole jump thing, and one thing that I do sometimes like to do, remember back when we were talking about the opposition of forces and how everything cancels one another out, and we were saying jump should look the same forwards as backwards. Well, let's have a little look and see how this plays in reverse. And there we go. What we see is it's still got this nice even spread of the speed at which he moves, and we do sort of get this sense of spring as if he's coming off his forelegs there. It's as if his forelegs are pushing him backwards. And also on the rear legs we do get this sense of them sort of catching his weight, and of course as he, you know, hits and plops down, his spine bends, sort of, you know, slowing his momentum, slowing his acceleration, and with his body and his muscles catching his weight there. So what we're seeing is that we've got that kind of motion symmetry working in our guy here as well. We might have wanted to check this out before to see how it was looking. Of course, as I said, that will show you problems with your timing and your spacing, but looking at it at this point is okay. And what we see, or what I think we're seeing, is that, you know, we've got a pretty good result here, whether we're playing backwards or forwards. And so that does help give us the idea that our timing and our spacing is working well at this point in time. Now, the one thing I've not animated at all yet is the head itself. We've animated the neck, but not the head. And that is just on this float controller. So, of course, that's maintaining its rotation at all times. Now, largely, he will start to, you know, roughly keep his head on a level, but not completely. So we will start to put some little moves on that. As he's coming down, I'm going to keep it held there until 3. And then just after he gets into his low, so about frame 8, I'm going to have it pitched down ever so slightly, like that. And we'll have him hold that till, let's say about here, frame 13. And as he leaps forward to, let's say, somewhere here, frame 18, we'll start to bring it up like this. As he comes across and is coming close to his landing, we'll start to dip it down again, so he's actually looking, of course, at his landing point. And then as he comes in here, catching himself, he starts to pull his head up to, well, in pretty much the same reason he brings his neck up, to stop himself face planting. And as we come here to 29, we'll make it pitched up a little like that as well. And by this point, it kind of started to come down a bit more again, and we'll just throw a hold on it there. I can maybe just have a bit of overshoot. So how does that look? Ah, that's nice. Look at that little head bob that we've got in there now. That's starting to look pretty sweet, I think. Again, just take a look at our motion in full speed. Oh yes, that look at what that head does when he lands. That looks really quite nice now. That, whoop, see that? Looks really good. Sort of dips his chin up, just making sure not to hit himself in the face as he lands on the opposing platform there. So all in all, pretty good, I do believe. Let's just have another little scrub through to see if there's perhaps something else that we could want to change. Let's just have a look at these neck poses there. Yeah, I'll bring the neck up on that frame, give him a greater sense of push. And on this one, 2 frames before it, I am going to bring it down ever so slightly again, just to exaggerate the lift-off power. Okay, at that point, that's a little strong there, so I'm going to move that forward 1 frame. So that slows it out a bit. And yeah, it's still actually possibly a little strong, so let's bring it more into a straight line with the spine. See how that looks. This point, bring it down. I'm going to again exaggerate that idea of him coming down, and there we go. We can probably come in here again at the point of landing, just exaggerate the dip a little bit, which also of course plays into him, you know, pulling his chin up there, and just let it start to have rolled back a bit more by this point before coming up at this point in time here. And we might actually just roll that on, let's say 1 frame, to give it a bit more time. And as we come out to here, we can perhaps have raised it up even more still. Okay, see how this is playing. Ah yes, he's got that nice sort of rest on his head. And of course the fact that it doesn't snap the way that he holds it once he comes into the landing, let me just do this on a scrub here, that head and neck sort of holds and sort of levels off like that. This gives a sense of the musculature, of course, in his neck. We're doing overlap, we're doing follow through, but it's not just flapping around. This isn't a soft jelly-like part. He has got control of it. He is resisting the motion as well. His muscles are working against, you know, his acceleration, his deceleration, his mass, his impact, and so on. And so we get a bit more of a sense of that coming in by doing this here. But we do get that little snap on the head, of course, as he hits hard, and the little head just does that little bob, but it's restrained by the neck. So that starts to look pretty good as well, I think. Let's continue with making a few final little adjustments and tidy ups in our linear phase of animation here. And well, we may as well start out from the start, mightn't we? Right, first of all, when he's coming down here in his anticipation before the jump, I think that maybe, and I'm not quite sure, I think maybe his butt is coming up a little bit high. Of course it starts down, and as he comes down it comes up. Now that's probably correct, but just to give him an extra little bit of spring force, I'm gonna dodge that down somewhat here. So I think that's going to be pretty good, and of course I'll just take that over to the other frame there. And I think I'm also going to roll it in a bit just to make it a little tighter there like that. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, because now he's coming straighter from that low point. You see the passage of his butt's motion there. And we can perhaps even bring this immediate next frame 13 here down as well to again, you know, put more spring on the back legs. And of course if we actually look at the motion path there, now it's coming, you know, through rather than sort of hooking over and doing a little lump here. So how's that up here? It's down. Yeah, see, he keeps his rear end low and then pushes through like that. I think that's a better little detail in the motion there. Just check it. Yeah, that looks good. I think I do believe that's probably a little bit more believable than what we had there previously. So I'm happy with that guy. Now if we look at the landing phase here, then what I'm going to do is also look at his rear end, and of course, you know, it bunches up, his spine bends as he takes the impact there. We sort of get a bit of a hold on it, but I'm going to keep that back a little bit like this, so that just, you know, lasts a little less time. Then once we get to here, I'm actually going to have begun to straighten his spine more, I think. So he's sort of, you know, counter bending. You're getting this flip flop between bending over to bending under, or the other way round, however you want to call it. And yes, by this point here, he'll also be, there we go, having a nice smooth arch in his back there. Perhaps we should actually dodge it down a little bit here, 31, really to just get the weight sort of slamming in there. Yes, see, now he sort of slinks out of it, which I think is quite appealing. I like to counterflex the spine a little bit more there. That's, yeah, starting to look quite nice. And I'm going to put a little overflex here like this, which he then comes back from by, I think, actually this point here. So he's reflexed by that point, and is then of course moving into his sitting position. Okay, so we need to work on the timing of how he actually goes into that sit, but that's okay, we can look at that, that's going to be fine. Mainly what I think we really need is just a bit of a hold there, so his rear end doesn't start going down so much before his chest moves, which starts moving there. So I'm going to copy that at this point, come out those 2 frames and paste it in, and I'll probably also move this one back so that turns into a little 3-frame hold there. I think I'm also going to make a little change to the way his root moves, because at the moment it just sort of pushes forward. What I'm going to do is, as the butt starts to come down there, we'll have it going forward pretty much as it is, so I'll key it there, but then as the butt comes right the way down, actually just 1 frame after, I'm going to dodge it back slightly like this and go back and get rid of that previous last keyframe. Okay, so that's not so bad at all, I don't think. That's reasonably good. It might look looks a little clunky here, but with splining afterwards, I think that might tidy up a fair bit once we actually get into converting that into splines. And we give it just a little bit of a rest bounce as he comes to rest at the end there. So we'll run with that as we've got it for now. Also, the shoulder lift, the clavicle action, which of course you may remember we did right at the beginning here when he comes down. What we want to do is, of course, have that at 0 at the beginning there. And let's hold it until frame 3 so he doesn't immediately start to raise his clavicles up. And of course they were coming in by frame 7 there. Of course we didn't shift those back when we sped up the action of him coming down. So he'll chiefly keep those as they were raised, but then I think at this point in his jump, as he starts and begins to reach forward for his landing, so let's go 1, 2, 3 like this, we're going to start pulling those clavicles down to let his arms, you know, reach down. So that can come down like this, and the opposing side of course. So good, we've got that happening there. Then of course he will make contact on this frame, so we'll get both of those clavicle controllers and put a hold there. And then 1, 2, 3, let's say, we will bring those right back up again so they take the impact and the weight. Cat shoulders do function like shock absorbers. They've got a real level of bounce in them. It's what allows cats to, it's one of the things at least that allows a cat to fall from many times higher than its own body length and still land without just smashing into the ground. They've got an excellent suspension system, particularly in the frontal body, which really does a good job of helping them to jump and leap and land quite efficiently. So we'll add a little touch of that in. And we'll hold those until, let's say, around here-ish. But then as he starts to come back up and right himself, not that many frames, let's say about here, we'll just put them back to 0 again, like that. Okay, once again, let's review this whole thing, see how he's looking. Yep, I'm quite pleased with what we've got there. I think that's looking nice. We've really got a lot of the necessary detail coming in now on our linear pass. So let's look at, again, in the landing, these feet and what they are doing, of course, because at the minute they were just sliding along as he lands. So let's take care of some of their little detail actions, shall we? And see what we need to do there. So down he comes, feet contact. Let's look first of all at this rear left leg there. You see, of course, it contacts, but then it starts to peel immediately just before it moves forward. So let's not have that peeling quite so quickly. Let us, in fact, take this frame and bring it there. Then it's only a 2-frame peel, which is possibly a little swift. And so we'll put the high point of the peel 1 frame after he actually starts bringing that leg there forward. We'll grab the IK control, and what we'll do is we'll just start to lift that off the floor slightly, only a scotch there, just as he starts to bring that foot forward like that. So that's quite nice. Okay, so that takes care of that one. Let's of course check the others. We'll do this trailing front foot here, because of course we know that we put the movement on that. Okay, we already got that coming up and over and planting itself down, and I think that overall we're reasonably happy with that motion, so that's fine. Let's go back and look at the other front foot here. We see that that lands there. We're going to want to work on the reverse foot control because we see that sort of collapses a bit there, so let's pull it back up. There we go. So there's a little bit of impact as the main piece of the foot hits the thing, which is fine, and it begins to turn up. So we'll also make sure it's fully back on Z to keep the toe portion of the foot nice and flat. Now we do want it rolled forward on Z some at this point. Something like that is pretty good there. You can see the lifting off of the toe, but we don't want it to be this whole long thing. So let's just say that that'll be 1, 2, 3 perhaps, and we'll set the Z here back to 0. That's starting to extend the leg quite a bit, possibly a bit too much, so let's take that back 1 frame further. There we go. So that's pretty good now, I think. Yep. Then got, of course, the foot is pulling forwards, so as it does so, let's grab the IK control, give it a little lift at, say, this point here. Just check the side, not too strong a lift, just a little, and we'll come on as well to this. There we are. So he rolls over like that, and we'll just pull up the elbow there using the reverse foot control, and we'll flap the toe down slightly as well, and that should get him to have that nice little pass over of the lifted toe. Yep, there we go. We can perhaps pull this last frame of the IK foot control out a whole 2 frames further forward, and what we can do at this in-between point here is we'll put the Z back to 0 there, but we'll take that and we'll bring his toe up like that, so he's got the little reach over and flap down. In fact, it doesn't even need 2 frames. I think 1 frame is going to be sufficient for that. And yes, that's looking pretty good to me. Okay, so that appears to be the front paws dealt with. Let's just review this whole section here and what we see happening. And yep, that looks pretty good to my mind. Just look at it in perspective because it can be a little hard to see exactly what's going on there in side view only. So yeah, that's nice. And plot those 2 feet like that. So let's just give the full speed. Yeah, we like that. It's pretty nice, smooth, natural motion there on those little front paws, so pleased with that. We can work then on the rear leg parts, make sure that we get those done right. Well, we already did one sort of, didn't we? At least a bit of it, which was the left rear leg here. So we did that, of course, first step already. So, of course, it does another little short step. So let's just come round and work on that. We can just do that with the little reverse foot control that is present here. So I'll just frame 40 there, lay in a keyframe. 2-3 frames later, it's just the first frame after the movement begins. We just bring it up there, so as the toe is pitching down slightly, and we'll come out to, let's say, 1 before it, actually no, it's come out to the 1 where it lands there, and 1, 2, let's just pop it right back down to 0 on its X, like this. And of course we'll grab the IK goal, and at that midpoint there we'll just give it a little bit of a lift. Again, not much there, just subtle. See, how's that? Yeah, that seems reasonable to me, I think. I might even come back over and just adjust the timing of that foot movement there. Just take those 2 keyframes and bring them back like that, and then that means that he's starting to flatten his toe right before the settling there. So then to the right side, let's just have a little peek at what this is doing. And okay, so where are we? There we are. It comes in and it lands. Bingo there. And sort of takes the weight. Good, okay, starts to move forward there. So let's say 1, 2 frames before, we'll hold that reverse foot. 1, 2, 3 there. We'll have it coming forward slightly, and where's it land? Lands there. That's its last frame. So 1, 2 before that. Actually, let's say 1 before that. We'll hold it, and then 1, 2, and we'll put it back down to 0 on its Z position. So that's flat again there, and we'll grab the actual IK, and again somewhere in its midpoint, right around here, I think we'll just knock it up a tiny amount. Let's see, how does that look? Blink. There we go. Yeah, I'd say that's good. So let's just look at what's happening on these rear legs then when he starts to sit. What we want to do is start to flatten out the foot portion, the metatarsal portion there. So let's key it here, and then as his butt comes right down, let's just switch to our side view, and there we'll do that to bring the knees down a little bit there. We should have nice action like that. Okay, so I think I'm happy enough with that. Perhaps those knees are coming a little bit too low. Yeah, something there. Okay, so that's all looking pretty good to me, I think. Let's double check the land and roll over the pause there. Yes, look at that. It's a nice little timing between, of course, this left side front leg and the left side rear leg there. See how they click over one another as he's just slowing himself down. Looks really nice. Okay, pleased with that. I would say at this stage for our linear pass, we are probably pretty much done, at least for all these major parts of the motion. So let's watch the whole thing through, see if that's looking nice, which I do believe, I think it is. I'm still not sure about how he goes into the sit down. Maybe we'll look at that in more detail once we get on to splining. It might just be the linearization that makes it look weird, but I guess we'll see. So for the most part, I am quite happy with that. I am going to make a couple of, just one little change here, which is the sort of action on these rear legs as he's coming in for the land. I am going to push those sort of a bit more forwards, specifically on this frame here, just one frame before the landing. So we're going to have this foot there, really reaching in, and just dodge it down somewhat there. Have this foot also reaching in, but not quite as far forward. There we go. And then on this frame here, I'm again going to dodge this foot down somewhat so it's not completely level, and I'm going to start bringing them both forward again, so he's creating a reach action on his rear legs like this. So he's anticipating, you know, them coming down and making contact. So there we go. I think that looks nice. Now you see his really starting to pull his, it's partly the impact force of him, you know, taking the weight on the front limbs, but it's also an intentional anticipation as he pulls his rear end forwards to try and get those rear legs making contact. They're not just now landing passively, which I feel they were doing a little bit before. Let's have a little look at full playback and see. Yeah, I think that looks better. You can just about see it. It's very subtle, but it does play nicely. I'm also going to come back to his lift off here and do something with the rear feet. Of course, working a lot as we have in the side view here, this is something that's been missed. But if you ever watch a cat as he's jumping and lifting off, when they come up like this, you will find that what their feet do, their rear legs do, I should say, is they do this proper spread eagle thing. They go right out like this, kind of like a frog almost jumping. To observe this, you really do have to see them from behind, but if you just look around on the internet, and you will find, you know, pictures and video and so forth. They do this spread eagle leg thing as they propel themselves forward. It's actually quite comical in appearance. So what we'll do is we're going to see that they're both on the edge at 16 and at 17 here. We'll grab both of the feet IK nulls there, come into the graph editor, grab their X positions. Let's just bring that up there, and what we're going to do is delete that key there so as we get interpolation across. And let's have a look at where else we might want to make that happen. So there we go, it's going spoing, and the legs are coming out wide like that. And are they coming together by this point? Yeah, I think really that is a good point for them to come together. Let's have a look at it play back from the rear angle here. Is that maybe a little harsh? Maybe, maybe not. I might just, rather than delete these keys, I'm just going to nudge them slightly like this. So that way he's starting to bring them together over a slightly increased period of time. And I also think, you know, quite frankly, on reflection, I might have pushed them a little wide apart. Maybe not. I mean, it is quite an exaggerated thing when you see it. So I'm just going to grab those keys there. I'm just going to use the scale tool to bring those down a little bit like that. Just adjust those ones so they're more symmetrical with the other side. There we go. Okay, and so looking at that in Scrub, I think that's a bit better. It's not quite as exaggerated as I had it before, which actually I think is probably a bit more realistic. And yeah, that seems pretty good. Let's spin around so we can see some other angle on it. Back here, I would say that it's pretty good. There we go. So we've got all of that as well. So I think that looks quite nice. Okay, so that's all of my little tidy ups done, I do believe. The only thing that's really left for me to do on the linear pass that we haven't touched yet is the tail. Of course, if you remember from our reference, the tail doesn't actually do all of that much. The tail tends to be held ever so slightly elevated. So what I'm going to do is, as he starts to come into his down like this, is I'm going to take his tail just a little bit after. So of course we've got a little bit of overlapping action. I'm going to start to bring that down there, and same on the second one, a bit on the third as well. Let's come into our perspective view so we can actually see this a bit more clearly. I'm also going to begin to straighten it out so we can come in here, yep, just get a little bit straighter there. So that's starting there, and just before, or rather just in this first frame of the jump there, then I'm going to have that so the tail is sort of following through in his anticipatory down movement like that, starting to look a bit like a kangaroo in that pose. And then as he leaps, now we really want to sort of straighten it out. So I take out that bend and kink there. We can look from the side. And I mean, you could put it up like this. That is sometimes seen. But in this case, we're just going to have it curved but held a little further down like this, I feel. As he comes over, we'll let it trail slightly, so we've got a bit of, overlap and pull. But again, the tail is muscular. It's not just flapping around like some passive part. He is controlling it intentionally. As we come here, we'll start to see it lifting up and curling like this. And 1, 2, 3, really sort of pulls it against the action of the impact there. And there we go, 6, let's say 7 frames through. You can start to straighten it out ever so slowly. And then by this point, I think we're starting to bring it back down some like this. And perhaps we're starting to get a bit of sideways curl into it as well, like that. So let's have a look at this whole thing in side view here, see how that tail appears. There we are. I quite like it. It looks alive, but it doesn't look passive. It's not just, flapping around as if it were just sort of, hanging lifeless off the back of his rear end there. So I think that that's pretty decent. And there we shall have, let's see, he's doing this. I think we'll just have a little hold key here. Let's see, we came down a bit, so I'm just going to let it nudge back up a bit at this point. And let's look at the heading side of it. Just turn it that way a little bit as well. And of course, as he comes down to sit, not at the initial low here, but just slightly afterwards, we shall roll it off this away, like this. And yeah, he's going to curl it around himself in that way that, cats will do. They will curl their tails around their behinds. There we go. Something like that perhaps. How's it look? Ah, look at that. Sweeps over the ground nicely. Again, if we just extend out a little here on our timeline, kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we can just sort of smooth that off in a little post action like that. Lovely. I think I'm quite happy with the way that appears to be working. Let's see it in playback, of course. Yeah, not bad. I think splined in, that should be quite good. It might be just a little fast, actually, that last keyframe there. So let's grab his tail controls and let's just pull those out. A couple more frames there, I think. Let's see how that is. Yeah, it's not bad. A last little touch then, as he lands and he goes into a step. Of course, at the minute he's moving completely straight line forwards. We will want to shift him side to side, I think. I should probably have looked at that before, but it's just as well to do it now, quite frankly, since we don't need to make a huge amount of adjustment to the placement of the feet themselves. So what we'll do is, obviously he's going to be straight through his jump, but as he comes in to that point of the landing there, we'll have him slink slightly this way with his, his upper body, his chest, and as he comes over here, got him slinking back over this way a little, perhaps a little bit of mild counter rotation there, and I think gives something nice. As we come to here, sort of twist him back that way, nudge him ever so slightly back over there, here, and push him back again, just counter twist him a little. Then as he comes down here into his seat, I'm also just going to give him a slight little bit of a roll just to put some, shape onto the body there. So let's give that a scrub and see how it looks. Yeah, slink, slink. Perhaps a bit too much slink at this point, so let's push him back somewhat there. should only needs to be subtle. Slink, slink. Yep, I do quite like that. Let's just check from the top side here, so we can see equivalently little slink, slink. Very nice. Okay, and of course we might have keys on the center line there, which we aren't actually going to need once we get into the spline interpolation. If anything, they would just get in our way. So let's come and have a look here. And whereabouts are we? We can see that we've got this initial slink there, and then actually that little centerline key that remains there might not be such a bad thing. And what I am going to do though is take that one out, because then I can put a little bit of spline interpolation over this hold here, and that should work out quite nicely, I think. Just want to take a little peek at something, which is going to be the pitch rotation. I think that that's okay. However, of course, you see that, you know, he's pitching down and comes up and there's this sort of rest. Let's see how that equates in terms of his movement there. I think that's going to be necessary, but I do believe that we'll be able to lose that one in his pitch rotation, so we'll get a smoother run in there. And we also don't need that secondary hold there, it's too short, and so that allows something a bit smoother to occur up in this part. Ah yes, and I do believe that that is one of the sources of my little sort of click in his motion when he was coming to rest there that I wasn't so keen on and was looking for an explanation for. The Y seems pretty good, so that's nice as it is. So then, one last look at our linear set motion here. We'll view the whole thing back, make sure that we're nice and happy with it. And I do believe we are. That's looking pretty sweet to me. All in all, pretty good. Good landing, good footfall afterwards with the pacing of the limbs. Jump is good. It's got a lovely spring to it. Let's see it. Let's have a look at it from the top view, shall we? Because that'll be an interesting view we haven't actually spent much time on. We can really see that slink going on in his body there as he pads out of his landing there. Look at the front view here. I need to zoom in on it so we can really see him. That looks pretty good as well. Getting a nice clean sort of movement there. Looks very, very slick. Okay, so with that all done, we are going to want to move on to actually turning this now into spline interpolation and really move to the final polish and finish. So, because it's pretty quick and easy, we'll just use the toolbox for this, grab all of his controllers, make sure we're on TCB, and in curves, of course, set the curve type there. And there we go, set everything nicely to TCB. That will, of course, have left us with some horrible motion there as things get spline interpolated across holds. So, of course, we'll just run a quick clean filter, which will flatten out any of those holds, as well, of course, as delete extraneous keyframes. Just give us a simple key reduction, and we should find that that's pretty much taking care of everything, everything except seemingly that little jump on the root, which is, of course, because it's not held there. He's coming straight into his down, so we just do that one manually like that. There we go, and we should see that otherwise everything is nicely splined through and taken care of for us. Yeah, looks good on a scrub, so let's just go and give it a full playback so that we can see it, and there we go. That's looking pretty nice, pretty smooth and clean. Have we got any really obvious noticeable issues anywhere? Not a huge amount that I can see, in all fairness. I think that we've got an awful lot of this done right, right away. We can see he's got a little bit of a worm forward there on his Z as he comes into his initial crouch. I don't actually think that's bad. I think that's worked out quite nicely. Whilst he's in the crouch, he's holding solid. So what I'll want to do is probably just tweak the curve there so as it isn't completely solid hold. So we can just reduce that from 1 just a little bit, not a huge amount. Same on the opposing side as well. That gives him just a little bit of weave and follow through. I am going to tweak off that initial Z key there, just so he doesn't loop out quite as much. There we go. It's sort of, look, we get that little, yeah, tiny little bounce. Maybe it's a little strong. Just tweak that back a bit. There, that's looking pretty good. So we get that nice roll, you know, that organic follow through into his anticipation just coming out of our curves there. I think that looks pretty good. Let's have a look at the rear end controller here, because that's sort of coming up before it goes down. Okay, again, that's coming out of our interpolation here, so let's just tweak that off there, because that should be nice and flat. Okay, that's good. And again, let's just adjust that Z part of it there, and we can just unroll that a little bit, I think, to give him just a little bit of, you know, just a little bit of bounce in that initial section there. Let's also have a look at the Y, yep, and the pitch there. Okay, we'll also go for just a little bit of overbounce here. Again, just tiny little amount. See how that plays. There we go. Oh, that's better. I think that's a lot cleaner there. Okay, we've also got a pretty tight hold on this somewhere in the middle. Let's see how all of this plays out. What I think I'm going to do is I'm just going to work that off a little bit tighter there, and let me just move my view so as we can actually see properly here. We're getting this very flat hold along the top there, so I think I'm just going to, you know, work that out and let that have a little bit of bounce in it. Meanwhile, I'm going to tighten up these ones so that doesn't bounce quite as much. So again, he's sort of resisting that motion somewhat, and I'm going to slow in or ease in to this final position there. I think that's quite nice. I'm going to allow for a little bit of bounce perhaps here. Let's see how that actually looks. Yep, that's good. Look, it's just that tiny little dodge that occurs across those frames there, which I think is nice. Let's go back and look at the root again for any such things that might be occurring on here. Bring up the graphs for that. Let's just have a look at, well, basically all of the channels in motion, see if we can spot anything particular. Well, there's the X, that little side-to-side weave he does. We'll just give that a little tweak, I think. The Y position to me looks pretty good. Again, we'll ease into his, you know, final seated position there like that, and I'm also going to, even though those are held, I'm going to give that just a little bit of smoothness over the top there. Look at his Z again, yeah, all pretty nice. And have a look at the X again. We've got the little bit of weave there, which I think we can allow for. Sorry, the heading, not the X, I should say. We've got this here again, a little bit of weave, I think, perhaps can be allowed on his pitch channel there, his root pitch channel. I'm also going to ease in to the final keyframe there, and this keyframe, which is, where is it? Right here, just as he's coming in for his landing. I'm actually going to consider that unnecessary, so I'm going to delete that single key, and then I'm going to grab the next one and sort of tighten that off a bit, and so that makes a nicer, tighter spline there, or a softer spline I should say. I'm going to underroll that one slightly so he, you know, sort of the curve there bottoms out into it. That gives it a nice clean line like that, and of course the bank, nothing is really happening, so that's fine. So let's again watch our animation here and see how it all appears to be going through. I'd say it's actually working out pretty nicely. That's quite slick and clean. Let's give it the old scrub and see it, yeah, like that. That's good, nice. Oh, we've got a problem occurs there. That's okay. Something about one of these interpolations, probably on the front pause there. Best way to solve that, rather than putting in another hold key there, is going to be just to adjust this following key there, and quite possibly this one as well, just before it. Let those arms have a little bit more space. in which to move. Let's also, of course, check the IK foot controls that we've got there, so we can possibly bring those down at this point. Now there we go. What we see is the limb really is just a bit overpressed at that stage, so that's taken care of that, but our motion is still pretty good and clean. And we can probably then pull these front feet back into that nice tight pattern here. Again, yeah, that works perfectly well. So that's all good there. So I would say, really, let's just make sure by looking at other angles, such as our front view here, make sure that this looks good and clean and everything appears nice and as it should, which I, do feel it does. Yeah, that's very nice. And we'll take a little peek in the top view as well, just see how that side movement, that little weave has worked out from this point of view. That's worked out quite nicely. And so really, with very little adjustment needed there after the spline pass on our guy, I would say that we are pretty much done with this animation. Let's see. Yeah, pretty good, pretty clean, smooth, and of course also quite natural. And again, the actual movement itself, the look that we get from it, the sort of signature to the movement, it really does say cat to us, even if perhaps the model itself isn't so cat-like. We're certainly seeing that cat-like look in the way that he carries himself, the way that he moves, the way that he leaps and lands. It's all in there pretty well, I'd say. So there we go, some good body mechanics, plenty of work on doing things like overlap, follow through, anticipation, how we work on the mass and the weight of the character and all of that sort of stuff, and bringing it together to create a natural, realistic looking motion. All in all, quite successful, I would say.